Okay, so we have two things to really tackle today. One is the rest of our discussion, which will, of course, feel too short, about category D, diversity. So we're in that category, we're looking at diversity, especially on the big concert stage. We have two things to really tackle today. One is the rest. And so that means concert dance on the big stage, like touring companies concert dance, and also we're really going to talk about musical theater both on Broadway and in film. Yeah. And the theme being diversity, we're going to look at the different ways in which people in America have addressed this desire to make big concert dance, right, more diverse, and how sometimes that was very appropriative and sometimes it was very authentic, and how we're still dealing with those questions today. So that's obviously way too much to cover in 50 minutes, but we also need to touch on your midterm coming up. Because next week, you guys are going to share as your peer review activity. You're going to share your note sheets that you're going to have with you for the midterm, which I don't have a blank sheet of paper here, but let's pretend this is a sheet of paper, yes? So wait, hold on. You can't see what's going on in here. Boop, boop, boop. Sorry, I'm fixing my video. There we go. Okay, sheet of paper. So you're going to have a sheet of paper, and you can write or print on both sides of that for using while you are taking your midterm. And those notes should be things like dates and names and references that you want to refer to. So you should have in your mind the general gist and theme of how you're going to answer the questions on the written part of the midterm, which I will give you today in this talk. And then, so if you're writing and you're like, what was the name of that guy who choreographed that thing? You could reference it because it would be on your paper, because that way you don't have to like memorize those dates, because I don't think that's the important part. The important part for me is that you guys understand how to connect the different themes, and that's what I'll be looking for. But of course, we need to be able to cite things, right? Because when we don't, that's appropriative. Okay, so let's talk about sort of the beginning and the end of this goal in dance and theater of diversity. So we've been talking a lot previously about how tap came to stage and how in the jazz era there were lots of, right, we still had absolutely segregated, sorry, I see that my internet is a little unstable today. So we had really segregated theaters, shows, content, and performers before the jazz age, right? So in the 1920s and 30s, we finally started to see not only like the Cotton Club, which I'm sure you've heard of in New York City, had Black performances and jazz bands and performers, but it was an all-white audience. So you still had that segregation, even though the people were in the same room. You didn't see Black people in the audience for these shows. It was catering. It just occurred to me, Cotton Club is like it's coded speech, right? This is the club for the white people to watch our dances. So Fred Astaire, for example, was a huge fan of Bojangles, and obviously trained with lots of Black performers. And so people like Fred Astaire and Hermes Pan in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s really tried in the best way that they knew how during that time of bigotry to give some credit back to the people who had taught them, but it doesn't age well, right? When you're in a world of bigotry and you're trying to give credit, we still, like, from our perspective now, it looks not like it's good enough, right? It looks stereotypical. It looks unappreciative. But that doesn't mean they weren't trying. And if we just ignore how that happened, we're not going to learn from it and do better. So we're going to take a look at how Fred Astaire tried to give some references. And then we're going to look at Katherine Dunham, who is this amazing, amazing, amazing performer. So in the 1930s, she was a dancer, and she is, I think, so important to us because she was an academic. So she went back to college and did a doctoral degree researching the dances of Haiti and African diasporic dances, mixed that together with what I'll call, I hate this term, but I'm going to say it, entertainment dances. Yeah. So she was already performing in locations like nightclubs, for example, the Cotton Club, but she also took her company, Les Ballets Nègres, on tour in the concert hall format, and she put them into choreographies in film. And so we're going to talk even more about those three sort of locations in America where things play. There's obviously still all of those things going on, right? There's the big stage Broadway, which is the place where you make the most money. There's the big stage concert dance like SF Ballet, and there's nightclubs and social venues, right? Burlesque, stripping, and all of those places have a really codified social judgment attached to them, wouldn't you say? Like the way that we think of a ballerina versus the way that we think of a pole dancer. We're going to get back to that when we talk about feminism and dance. It's coming next, I think. So Katherine Dunham is amazing because she is the one who brought community dance into academia the first time, started to codify it, started to write about it, and then took her company on tour and basically educated the population by being able to do sort of all three. She had some ballet training. She definitely did jazz dance by bringing especially Caribbean dance movements in with the classical upright body. And then, right, so she really was the person who started to make an intellectual and academic bridge between community dance and entertainment dance and also ballet. So we're going to look at that. And then we're going to take a couple of looks at current diversity on stage. So we're going to look at a couple of Lin-Manuel Miranda moments here and talk about blind casting and what the heck style is going on with the choreography behind him. What's going on there? Let's take a look. So I'm going to share screen and hop straight into things. I feel like I'm really feeling my full caffeinated coffee this morning, which is exciting. Maybe we'll get through everything. That's great, right? Pardon my cough. Alrighty. Okay. So this is
System, and that is
Katherine Dunham.
today, although she's not given credit.
This is one of the videos in your. Pardon me, I see my internet's going terribly today.
You learn to move each part of your body separately as though it has no connection with the other part of your body.
So that's polycentrism.
Isolation of everything, the hands, shoulders, hips.
The movement of the head, the snap of the finger, the wiggle of the knees and legs. I don't think anyone ever mastered it as well as she did. And contract.
Dunham builds her technique on her knowledge of ballet, modern, and Afro-Caribbean dance.
It covers the whole range of training the body to move. What was added were the African elements.
Her technique was the hardest technique I'd ever done. You did all the head movements to the side. Head movements I had never done this before, where she said, pull through the ear and go off on the side. All these things, spinning the head around. So the head dances. Then we went to the shoulders.
And up and down, and up and down.
To the rib cage.
And out first. Chest way out. Clear.
To the hips, how to contract the hips front, isolate the hips to the side, to the back, to the side. How to circle the hips up and down.
Take the hands up.
Then you put all that together and you move across the floor.
Right. Right. Circle it around. Reach out. Reach out.
But of all the Caribbean movements Dunham teaches, the most exciting comes from the island of Martinique. There, men perform a fighting dance called the Agia. A fusion of African and European combat styles, the Agia developed because slaves were not allowed to possess weapons. The Agia is martial art disguised as dance. As a tool, Dunham uses film she shot in Martinique to teach the dance to her company. She decides to build her first new choreography around the drama of the Agia.
Okay, so one of the things that I think is so important about that particular clip is, one, you can definitely see how she is in the form that she has developed her dance technique, that she's using the Africanist elements, right? And that is polycentrism, right? Her warm-ups are talking about moving just the head, just the shoulders, just the ribs. Polyrhythm, you can see when they're going across the floor, they have to move their head at one time and their feet at a different time and their torsos at a different time as well. Obviously. So I'm going to come back to that idea of the Africanist elements in a moment, but also that, remember in the 1800s, and still to this day, when people would talk about Black vernacular dance, there's always this extra layer of it comes naturally because they're Black, or that dance is so wild, or it's a quote unquote naturally erotic or savage, fear, like all those adjectives that are used commonly for Black vernacular dance are integrated, that's maybe not the right word to use, but with the stereotypes that American and white culture has put on Black people, right? That young Black man would be viral and athletic but tricky, and that those are racially imbued comments about the dance. And for Katherine Dunham to take the movements and to make those movements into a dance technique that is codified and broken down so that it can be taught from people to people to people to people is part of what makes it sort of valid in the Western world and respected as not just something that is quote unquote an ethnic dance that happens quote unquote naturally. Because when we say that a dance is natural or inherent to someone because of their race, then we're in a sense erasing or disqualifying the technical prowess and years of training that it takes to be able to do that dance. So that is why it's so huge for dance to be spoken about in words and codified in a technique. So here we're seeing just a moment of For Bird with Love, which is an evening length concert dance by Alvin Ailey. So Alvin Ailey would be second generation modern dance. So Alvin Ailey's movement, like Pearl Primus, was both Black vernacular dance movements and elements of ballet, which together form jazz, and also elements of modern. So really in the mid-century, these things kind of all overlap. And Alvin Ailey would have been the generation after So definitely was influenced by Katherine Dunham. Scooch forward here because time. And these links are in your actual reading, so you can definitely find them. I just wanted to stop in. Let's come back to that. This, I think, is one of the best competitive hip-hop dances that there is. I think you've seen it before, but I wanted to just have it preloaded so that we could talk about what kind of dance is that. Okay, so contemporaneous with Katherine Dunham, we have Fred Astaire, who Jason is already a fan of, I think. So Fred Astaire was a huge fan of tap. He's one of the greatest tappers in the world. When he was young, before he became super mega famous, he actually danced in shows and venues with Bojangles, who apparently paid him some compliments, and one assumes that they played together backstage. Play is maybe not the right word, but as dancers, you might be improvising together backstage. And so Fred Astaire really, this is going to be one of those examples of Fred Astaire trying to give credit to Black dancers and Black dance in their work. Fred Astaire was so huge that he had full choreographic control over most of his films, and was one of the people who really insisted, films like to come up close and be shot. Most of the shots we see are mid-range on cinema, so you see only to the chest. So it really took dancers to force the cinematography to step back so you could see the feet. And this is from the musical Shall We Dance, in which Fred Astaire is an American man who pretends to be Russian because everybody thought Russian ballet was the absolute bee's knees. And he is going to fall in love with Ginger Rogers because they both realize that they love tap. And essentially the subtext in the plot is really about loving American things, loving Americanness, and embracing that. But in this scene, he's on a steamship, like a big cruise liner, and he's on tour with the ballet company, and he's secretly a jazz and tap dancer, but shh, don't tell, because he's really Petrov, not Peter. And he sneaks downstairs to the steam room instead of being upstairs in the fancy white people party. And actually, I'm gonna come back to that moment. This is the intro to the scene. You see the syncopated rhythms in the working movements of the dancers here.
Zoom, 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 zoom. The world is in a mess. Yeah. Politics and taxes and people grinding axes. There's no happiness. Zoom, 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 zoom. Rhythm lead your ale. The future doesn't fit me. If I can only get me someone to snap that bell. Happiness is not a...
So eventually, of course, he takes over to show off that he's cool enough. But also this is taking the movie into the realm of Black vernacular dance, and that ends up superseding the importance of the ballet company. And it's been written about this, some of the choreographic choices that he makes here are sort of making fun of that change, right? So here he's looking at his hands and he's like, oh, my fingers are too stiff from that ballet training. What is this awkward first position? Now, if you've done ballet, you know that is a terrible example of first position arms. But he's purposefully choreographing these like the worst parts of ballet, essentially, so that he can throw them off in exchange for the wonder of Black vernacular American dance, right? The easygoing softness, the tapping itself, syncopated rhythms, fluid body, ephebism, polycentric movement. Oh, look, here we have a ballet bar, and he like jumped right into the plie. Okay. Polyrhythms, right? Because the beat of the machinery is different than the beat of his feet. So that's an example, I think, of a good way in which Fred Astaire and other white performers and choreographers of his time were really trying to make audiences see the value of where dances came from. This would be not a good example. Have we seen Swing Chime? We haven't seen this yet, right? So this is 1936. This is just the year before. And Fred Astaire is doing, this is a segment from the whole show. He's doing a dance performance on stage in which he is giving a tribute to Bojangles himself. But Fred Astaire is in blackface here. Like, and you don't see this dance very often anymore. Because, you know, it's not very... Anyway, it's a beautiful, well choreographed, complex, highly difficult dance. And there's, you know, highlighting of the idea of the shadow. He's using lots of black and white contrast here to make it really clear that he's talking about these things. Also that he's multiplying his own body, right? So that the person who is dancing, in this case it's supposed to be Bojangles, is a mentor and leader of the dance, like people follow and copy him as sort of a symbology of that shadow dancing behind. But he's wearing blackface. Like, this is not, it's not okay. And so that's an awkward example of people taking things to the big stage. At the time, no one was offended. Well, okay. Let me just erase that untrue comment. At the time, white audiences had no perception that Fred Astaire wearing blackface might be in any way appropriative or insulting. Instead, they were like, wow, we should really appreciate Bojangles and his giving wisdom to tap dance, right? So in contrast to that, what happens when you have a person of color choreographing their own dances? So both in the case of Bojangles, the Bojangles dance we just saw, Fred Astaire is definitely doing his own style of tap dancing. It's not the same style of tap as Bojangles did. So it's not that he was covering Bojangles tapping, which would have been a lot more still on the top, right? Little tiny movements up on the toes. And Fred Astaire has got much more of those like traveling, leaning movements that he's known for because he's done a lot of ballroom influence into his choreography. But in contrast to that, you have Katherine Dunham's company, which is going to take African diasporic movements and meld them together with ballet training, as we learned. But we still, even here, have stereotypical movements, even though we still have this idea of like throwing off the formality of white culture, right? She just took off her little white shoes, and now she's doing isolations of the rib cage and of the pelvis that are from the African diasporic movement. But the question is, like, she's got these mixes of elements from modern dance, from Afro-Haitian dance, and yet we're set somewhere in Africa, and there's elements of belly dance. So she too is fusing all of these different dance styles, and yet she still has she does a much better job of not being appropriative and of showing a more authentic version, but she's still doing fusion. So I guess my point really is there's a whole gradation here between appropriative dance movements and fusion dance movements. So here we have, we're going to watch a little element from In the Heights. So here's little baby-faced Lin-Manuel Miranda back here. And obviously the singing is fantastic. The lyrics are fantastic. But I want you to take a look at the movement in the back and tell me, like, what many dance styles do you see happening behind her? Slow motion lift back there. So we have little Latin hip section going on. We have straight hip hop going on for a moment in the front here. But we had that lift. There's two lifts that were definitely for a more balletic or jazz training. We have breakdancing. And that character right there, the breakdancer, basically the entire role of that character is just to have breakdancing and spray paint in that show. I don't know if you've seen it, but that's basically all they do is they come in with spray cans and then do some breakdancing to represent the elements of hip hop. So it's kind of funny and obvious, but I mean, we're all grateful for those moments. So this is an excerpt from Hamilton. Same question. What do you see going on here in terms of dance styles? And I'm not sure. I need to look up the name of the choreographers and see if it's the same person. But one of the things that I've seen in both of these, and especially in Hamilton, is that instead of making formations that face the audience that are generally flat, the formations in Hamilton are almost always on a wheel or circle or cipher shape. So we have a little bevel there from jazz dance. Got tutting. Definitely isolations, right?
I remember my Elias is expecting me. Not only that, my Elias is expecting. So we gotta go, gotta get the job done. Gotta start a new nation, gotta meet my son. Take the bullets out your gun, the bullets out your gun. We move undercover and we move as one. Through the night we have one shot to live another day. We cannot let a stray gunshot give us away. We will fight up close, seize the moment and stay in it. It's either gotta meet the business end of a bayonet. The code word is Rochambeau. Diggy, you have your orders now, go man, go.
Ballet leaps, ballet/jazz leaps, martial art movement as dance, a la Katherine Dunham, little bourrées behind there. Hip hop. And a lot of those slides, I think, are interesting to sort of debate. Like, that's definitely a jazz dance pencil turn we just saw there at the end. And I think we think of those slides and that floor work as being relative to breakdancing, but all of those slides are also part of modern dance. As he frantically waves their white handkerchief. We have this slow motion dramatic movement, which is definitely an element from concert dance on the big stage.
We negotiate the terms of surrender. I see George Washington smile. We escort their men out of Yorktown. They stagger home single file.
All right. Let's pause for a moment here. Oh, sorry, Lynn. That was quite freeze. Let's pause on some dancers, shall we? There we go. All right. Let's talk about this a little bit here. What do you guys think about the pros and cons of how we're doing, let's say how we're doing with dancing now? So we were just looking at a modern version, or, I hate to say the word modern because there is modern dance. So if you think about Lin-Manuel Miranda's work and the dancing behind, what do you guys think in terms of how it's representing the cultures? Is it representative of the cultures of America? Does it look like American dance to you? Especially if we're talking about Hamilton, which is supposed to be a purposefully blind cast musical that represents, for anybody who doesn't know, I'm sure everybody knows, but just in case, Hamilton is about the formation of the American democracy, and instead of casting a bunch of white people to do the parts of historically white people, he purposefully cast the show with all people of color. Is that blind casting? Is it color conscious casting? Like there's not supposed to be any white actors hired for those roles on purpose? And the same question about the dance. Like, are those dancers representing American dance? Of course, it's not the dances that they were doing in 1776. What are your reactions? How does it make you think about what it means to be American? Because that shows about what it means to be American. There's no wrong answers here at all, because I think what I want is to give you guys a moment to share your reaction to a piece of art, because that's what we're going to be talking about next, is how is a piece of art giving you a message?
Yeah. Even though I feel like it's blind casting a little bit, it's color conscious at the same time, because in the end we only represent George Washington as a white figure.
Yes, thank you for that correction.
Yeah. And via dance, it's how we think of America now. It's just I don't know how to say it, but it's sort of like either way, it's, even though it's dance based around America today, it's supposed to be back then.
I think you've got something right on the tip of your tongue there.
Yeah.
Lin-Manuel's choices are showing us an old story in the way that we would like to see America now, right? We would like to see America integrated. And that is shown in the casting choices they're making. And it's also shown in the dance movements they're making. So the clip I showed you had a lot of different dance elements in it. There's other clips where it's very clearly like Rockette style jazz dance, like Fosse elements are definitely shown. Because Lin-Manuel Miranda, although Within the Heights is semi-fantastically autobiographical, that he comes from the barrio, he doesn't. He does come from that neighborhood, but his father was a politician. He went to one of the best performing arts schools in New York City and was mentored by Stephen Sondheim, who is like a giant in the musical theater world. So take that with a grain of salt. They're there's so much privilege there that it helped him be able to do the amazing work he does. That said, I think Hamilton is designed to make us question how we see America, specifically casting people of color. Number one, makes jobs for people of color in Broadway, and those are still in short supply. He really turned the tide in the, again, we said big business arena for dancers to make it not only acceptable but expected for production companies to hire dancers of color and to not go with the default character's race just because, but to like mandatorily always question, do I need to put a white person in this role just because it's always been played by a white person or because the character is supposed to be white? Stop making that assumption that that's the rule. So that's huge, 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 huge. We are forever changed because of that choice. And that choice is also, if we look at the dance elements, right? Because we're looking for the message that is coming from the choices that the director makes. When we see on Broadway, not just straight jazz dance, but also hip hop, but also, remember, he made that character up just to do breakdance on the stage. Had we had breakdance in a musical on big, capital B, big corporate Broadway before? I'm not sure. Certainly not highlighted in that way. It was definitely new-ish if he wasn't the very first. And then when we look at the overall dancing that's happening in the backup dancers, there's also integration of different dance forms that come from different communities within America. And we know from looking back at the Fred Astaire clips and the Katherine Dunham clips that people have been trying to do this for the whole last 100 years at least. But have we gotten yet to the point where we're actually doing it not appropriatively? Do you think we're still appropriating? I mean, there's kind of a big question here also about, like, Lin-Manuel Miranda is a man of Latin descent, but he's really into hip hop. And as we spoke about, he grew up with a lot of privilege, and yet he presents his story in the musical In the Heights as, you know, rising up from the barrio. Are those elements that in 40 years from now we'll look back and see as having been appropriative or integrated? And I'm not saying that there's an answer to this question. I just want to encourage you to hash it out, really. Like, tell me what you think. Do you think, Amber, you're so wrong, that's just being so picky? Or do you think, like, I don't know, what do you think? What do you think? I'm going to shut my mouth. Jason, Claire? More Patrick?
Forgive me, but could you repeat the question again?
Yeah. Do you think that the Lin-Manuel Miranda examples have succeeded in finally being an integrated and accurately representative creation that really shows dance and diversity in America? Or in 40 years from now, will it look inauthentic or appropriate? Or even now?
Even though for the moment I believe it has, but sooner or later in the future it will just be dance because there will be new types of dance that we'll have to learn in the future.
Mm-hmm. So let's take let's think about how to answer this question. What is happening currently in America socio-politically? Do I have a little screen share for you? Doop. It's one of these. It's not that. Is it this one? Yes. Okay. So what is a socio-political context? So if we're talking about either of these, what... Oh, yeah. Here, I'm going to put that link in the chat, Jason, if you want to translate it. Right? Last 10, 15 years that these musicals have become really popular. No wrong answers. You can guess. I don't need you to look up like authentically. What do you think has happened in America that relates to the topics that either Hamilton or In the Heights are about? Want some help? Yeah. Okay. So if we're going to talk about In the Heights, so the musical came out a while ago, but it was just again made into a movie musical, right? So we could talk about either of those eras of creation in terms of what might have influenced the producers of the show. So let's talk about the movie that just came out, like last year or the year before? So they're making this movie and they're making choices about the words are probably going to be the same. The dancing definitely could be altered from stage to film. And the edits and the acting can all be altered to highlight different things. So if you made a movie in 2020, what happened in 2020 that has to do with race and economics? Black Lives Matter protests all across the country, right? Also, the death of many Black men at the hands of police is huge socio context. If you're talking specifically about the political end of it, that would be laws and also lawsuits. So when George Floyd's murderers went to court and how the courts dealt with that would be count as a political part of that. So as opposed to the protests themselves would be socio-political context, right? They're talking about trying to change laws and their actions that people did in the real world. So representing In the Heights as a musical is we know that Lin-Manuel Miranda's point is to get his audiences to see these characters in a different way. So he wants the audiences in the Heights to see the young woman from the barrio who's going to rise up as an academic, and the hopes and dreams of the people who are stifled by poverty, and the dance moves that we previously remember. We talked a lot about community dances and how they were often done in person in community, and then they would be appropriated by performers who had a broader audience. And so then, in the early 1900s, we had lots of white performers, and before, right? The whole of minstrelsy is based on white performers stealing dance moves from communities of color. And so Lin-Manuel Miranda is now actually putting those communities, actors, and dances on stage, on the big stage, so that they themselves can earn the money and get the credit. So if you were going to talk about Lin-Manuel Miranda's message through his musical, you would look at what were the socio-political events that he might be making reference to, right? So the choreographer is making choices, the creator of the production is making choices about what they want their message to be. So here, let's look at message. What is message? So a message is designed, it's what's in a piece of art that is designed to challenge predominant views, like that hip hop or breakdancing is just a street dance, that it isn't worthy of high ticket prices or respect, or that it's, natural to those bodies, thereby erasing the skill and practice that mastery takes years to achieve. It can be a theme or a big idea or a moral or a lesson, right? So you could talk about Lin-Manuel Miranda's message in Hamilton being that the American story isn't just about white people and power, that it's about a community coming together, that people of color are American, that people of color are working together to create a democracy through philosophical debate and collaboration as well as military prowess, right? And that's an assumption that white America has had because we've always told the story of the founding fathers as a bunch of white people, that there's sort of like an implicit bias that the legal and political structures of our country are something that white people created. That is both true and untrue, right? And so Lin-Manuel Miranda's message with Hamilton is trying to challenge the American white Eurocentric assumption that white people founded this country, when we know that like none of the buildings could have even been built without all the slaves who built them, for example. Does that well, let's go on to the next here, yeah? Yes, Patrick?
I'm good.
Okay. Oh, that's not the thing I want. Okay, so we're going to come down here. Let me check this. Okay. So, midterm. Dun, 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 dun. So there's two parts to your midterm. One is a multiple choice part, very similar to the quizzes you've done already. Yeah? Very similar to the quizzes you've done already. Hint, hint, hint. The second part is the written short answer questions. And that's what we're going to talk about reviewing now. So here is in your Canvas shell. You can see the topics here. We are definitely going to want to talk about the Africanist elements. And then we have actually your questions. These are the real questions that are on the midterm. Did I do... Let me go to the next page. I think it's more clear on the next page. No? Well, yes. Let's preview this. There's no secrets here. Okay, here we are. Question 1. Focus on lineage. Discuss a specific piece of choreography that we covered. Describe the movement phrases in the dance. Identify the choreographer and performers and the time that it was created. Name 3 sources that were combined or influenced that movement. Tell us if the performers or choreographer are authentic to the movement, right? Is it a white guy doing a breakdance? Or is it a person of color who learned the breakdance from people who have been doing the breakdance in their community? And explain issues of how appropriation, blind casting, and authentic dance training relate to this piece. So blind casting, we just talked about a little bit today. That would be where you are casting a performer of any race, color, ethnicity, background, even gender, like rando fill in the blank person into a role that is not traditionally filled by that person's category or area of identification. So here's the thing that I want you to be aware of on these short answer questions is I have a rubric, right? I'm ticking off hitting certain points. So definitely read and reread and triple read the instructions, because the key to getting the points here is absolutely in the instructions. A specific piece of choreography. So you're not talking here about a whole category of dance like swing dance. No, you've got to pick one dance. Think about picking one video of one dance. Describe the movement phrases. I definitely want you to say, like, you know, they did a regular swing dance step and then they did a flip where the guy lifted the girl up over his head. You don't have to necessarily use quote unquote dance terminology. It's okay to just talk it out. You know, like she lifted her hand up in the air and she waved it like she was saying hi and drank a glass of milk. That's fine as long as you're describing the movements. Identify the choreographer and the performers and the time it was created. Yeah. Name 3 sources. So this could be steps from community dances, social dances, or other influential choreographers that were combined or influenced the movement. So for example, we were looking at Hamilton today, and you could hear me sort of calling out when I saw things that looked to me like other things. And understand when I say that this is art we're talking about here. And aside from when you've had, for example, an interview with the choreographer and the choreographer is saying, I got this dance move from this person, we are not always perfectly sure about these things. And so it's okay when you're answering these questions to tell me, to say to your reader, I saw this lift where the women were all lifted up in a giant X shape and put down on the ground. And that giant X body shape looked to me like jazz dance, and the straight and long legs looked to me like they came from ballet, and the lifting looked like it came from ballet because the bodies were held so stiffly in the torso. It's okay for you to guess. Yeah, it's okay for you to say, in my opinion, when you're doing this. So don't be frightened away from making a guess, because I would love it if you could say, I read this interview and I know for sure that Katherine Dunham took this particular body movement from a Haitian dance that she said, right? Like we saw in the first documentary today. That's even better, but don't be frozen into silence. It's okay to state your opinion on this. Okay. So yeah, I'm looking for lineage. One dance, 3 things that influenced it. That's question 1. Question 2. Focus on civil rights. Share the biography and accomplishments of a group of color that performed before the civil rights era. Please don't everybody write about Bojangles. Please don't. You can, but I'd love it if you talked about more than Bojangles. I've got Josephine Baker in here because she's a great example, but we haven't really covered her in depth yet. So if you want to hold back on that, that's okay. You can pick anybody that we've covered who was dancing before essentially the 1950s, 1960s, yeah. What obstacles did they face as Black performers in America due to their skin color in their daily lives? Yes, daily lives. So tell me about the oppression, economic or legal, like the real life experience of racism that they're experiencing here. Yeah, specific legal and social barriers. So don't just say that people didn't like them or it was hard to get jobs. It's hard for everybody to get jobs. People don't like people. I want you to say, like, they couldn't work in a white theater, right? Give me concrete racism examples for that, please. I know, that sounds fun. Yay! But we're facing our honest history. What expectations did mainstream audiences place on their dancing? Yeah, so if we were talking about a person of color performing in their particular time that they were performing, what did the audiences expect their dances to look like based on their racial stereotypes? So that you want to be a little bit aware of, like, are you talking about somebody who was working during the time of minstrelsy or someone who was working in the 1930s versus that kind of a thing. So you know a little bit about the stereotypes and racial rules of the time is what you're demonstrating in this. And then here is the fun part, I think, of this question. How did their work comply or resist with the stereotypes? So remember we talked about the Whitman sisters. Please, I know everybody wants to write about the Whitman sisters in this question. Try to lean out. But remember how the Whitman sisters performed both plantation songs in blackface and then performed without blackface with their blonde hair showing instead of wigs, and so that they showed that they were not just simple, ignorant black folk, which was the stereotype of the time, but that those songs had depth, emotional depth, because they added complex emotions and lyrics, and that they were also businesswomen of the world. So they were purposefully taking those stereotypes and proving them wrong, even while they were playing them. And there's lots of performers we covered who did something like that. Remember, Bojangles is doing dancing, but upright in a suit, right? He's doing like what was a community street dance, and he's doing it in a suit. So there's all kinds of examples like that. So pick a performer, look at some of their dances, and look how they're crossing the boundary between stereotype and respectable person, because they are respectable people. All right, number 3, African elements of dance. You definitely want to put those African elements on your cheat sheet, as it were, yes, so that you can refer to them. And you're going to choose any dance and describe the movements and how they represent each of the African elements in that dance. So this one, if you are really antsy, remember we started with more current hip hop and breakdance examples and circus dances. So if you wanted to get like more current, that's what your essay number 3 is going to give you the opportunity, is to describe how the African elements work there. And you can also pick a dance that looks white as heck and talk about where we see the influence of Black vernacular dance and African aesthetic elements in a white as heck dance, because nothing is as white as it seems. Is that the catchphrase for this class? Maybe. Does this part make sense? We cool with that description? Okay. And then the rest of this is just multiple choice questions. Okay. Do you have any questions? Yes.
For the midterm, is it timed?
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah. So it's timed 90 minutes.
90 minutes.
Yeah.
An hour and 30. Okay.
An hour and a half.
So that means
how long are these essays supposed to be?
So short answer questions. Do I have that in the instructions here? That would be really nice of me, right? All right. Yeah, anticipating 2 to 3 paragraphs is about 5 to 6 sentences each. So like,
here, what is it? 2 to 3 paragraphs?
5 to 6 sentences each. So like, if I were, yeah, so not quite a page for each question, like a half a page.
And there's how many of those? There's how many of those?
3 written questions. Oh, sorry, I just thought I was still screen sharing here. If you're looking over here, this is the opening page for the midterm exam before you start. It has the answers to some of these questions you guys are answering or asking. Yeah, you can take it once. It's timed. The time is down here. There's 3 essay questions. Definitely make sure you're using social political events of the time of the choreographer whenever you're talking about something, and definitely talk about, describe the movement. Describe the movement. Socio-political, describe the movement. I'm looking for that in every single question, for sure. Sometimes I suggest that you take a first whack. I mean, if I were taking this test, I would take a first whack at everything and try and get through with your major points, and then and then if you have more time, go back, look at your questions, see if there's anything else to add. You don't need to put links in for this one. Just name the artists in the performance. And remember that you're talking about specific dances in some of them, not just like a whole dance style. Yeah. And specific legal or social restrictions, not just being judged. Yeah. Any other good questions? Okay. So let me take a moment to describe next week's peer review assignment, because we'll do this again, and this is the assignment that I warned you has like the hard deadlines. So you're gonna share by I mean, look how nice I am there. I just stuck that in there for you. There's the questions roughly. Here's some advice on what to put in your notes. Yeah, so this is all in the instructions for next week's assignments. So it is due on the 27th, which is Wednesday. Yeah. So by Wednesday, you're going to upload your sheet of notes to this assignment. Yeah. And that is half of the grade. And I'm going to come through and just say, like, did you have names and dates and notes? And you can even, since you know what the questions are, you're probably going to pre-select what dances you want to talk about. And you could like roughly take notes on some examples of the movement that you specifically want to write about, right? So you're going to upload that. And then the system automatically will assign peer reviews to you on the due date. So you want to get your notes in by the due date, 11:59 p.m., because at midnight it's going to give you peers. And if you don't have your submission in by the time it assigns those peers, then it won't give you any peers. And then like I can try and get back in to assign them for you, but it becomes this like rolling ball of stress. So just turn it in early, right? It doesn't have to be beautifully formatted, but you want to share with each other. So then after Wednesday, 11:59 p.m., so Thursday onward, before Friday night, you're going to come back here and you should have 3 other people's notes to check out. How nice is that, right? So you're going to give your peers some feedback on their notes. For example, if you see someone who's just got, they're talking about swing dance in general, as opposed to like the Hell's a Poppin' video with this group in this movie, or if they maybe are missing one of the 5 Africanist elements, or it's a little bit unclear, they're not quite differentiating between, I feel like the trickiest ones here are the difference between high effect juxtaposition and embracing the conflict, because those two ideas overlap, remember? So, but how do you make sure that you describe both of them in a dance? Right? So that kind of feedback, you might want to say like, I'm not really seeing you addressing both of these points here. You might want to add something there, or I noticed that you're talking about Bojangles, but you were talking about the Black codes instead of Jim Crow, or you want to focus on that person there and make sure you talk about the Great Migration, etc. So I also put this little blurb here in the description, because this is kind of if I were to split the history into sort of chunks of time, that will give you an idea of what assumptions to make in terms of what the laws were like. I think knowing which historical area you're in will help you to be able to pin a socio-political event to each choreographer, and that will help you to write your question answer a little better. So that's the sort of feedback that I want you to give each other, and that's the other half of the points for next week's work. Yeah, so half of it is getting your stuff in and doing a reasonable job there, and the other half is to give some solid feedback to your peers. So once Friday night is done, and this assignment will pretty much close after that. Then you have time after that to take them. And so you've seen 3 other people's notes. You might want to gather some information or some good ideas from them. And then you want to like update your own 2 pages, and you take just your own, double-side page of notes with you into the midterm exam. Yeah, so there's like this assignment, the peer review midterm study guide assignment, is meant to be a group study exercise. Cool.
So I'm not so clear here on these dates. It's like Wednesday before midnight, we have to have the first draft of these notes, and these notes are only supposed to pertain to those essay questions, nothing else.
You can put in anything that you think will help you in your notes. Yeah.
Okay, and then after we get the 3 other notes from the other students, which will be after midnight, Wednesday into Thursday, early morning.
Yeah.
When
Thursday morning,
we're critiquing that, and then we're putting those comments, what, by Friday? Is that? I'm totally confused.
by Friday night. Yeah, no, you're actually totally correct. So
Okay.
once you've submitted to this assignment, you all know how to do that because you've all done assignment submissions already. Then over here in your to-do on your dashboard, I'm sorry, I'm not in student view, but I imagine it's similar. You're going to see a notification that you have peer reviews assigned. I wonder if it's, let me see if I can do this. Whoa! I don't want to zoom in, no! Okay, so I'm going to start this assignment. I'm in the student view now. I'm going to say, here are my notes. Whee! Okay. Terrible. I get an F. Good. It says submitted, and then here it says assigned peer reviews. You should see 3 people's names show up here, and you can click on those people's names, and it will show you their work. It would be so great if I could show you what that looks like, but I don't think I can do that.
So basically, it's a text box entry. It's not an upload with a document. It's a text box entry.
Yes. Yes, that is true, because when we upload a document, then sometimes students don't have the same apps, and it makes it harder for you guys to peer review each other. So totally just paste in your text. Even if you're working in Word, you can copy all and paste it into that text box.
And then where are the comments? I mean, what portion of that are we uploading the comments into? Directly into the text box of theirs?
No, so the text
separate?
box, this view is how you submit, right? When you do a peer review, that's the part I can't show you from the teacher. I wish it worked. I definitely recommend that you do this on a desktop rather than on your mobile phone or tablet, because it's a little bit like fishier on the tablets and mobile phones. So if you can't see something like the peer review sheet, when you do the peer review, you should see this rubric that you can click on to give feedback with the rubric, and also a comment bubble. Here, hold on just a sec. I have an idea of what I might be able to show you. I'm going to... Getting out of student view. I'm going to leave student view. I'm going to go to speed grader. Does that work? No. I'm trying to see if I can show you guys what it might look like. Test student. No. Okay, I think this is kind of what it looks like on your end. So his submission would be here, and then there's this show rubric button. There's your rubric. You can click on things and save your comment. And then in here, you could say, this is a test example. Eee. Thanks, Patrick, for letting us use you as an example. um, and you guys won't affect the grade. I will come through and put the actual grade on. So don't be shy. If they did a really terrible job, give them a terrible feedback in positive and supportive words. Right? But it doesn't help anyone to say like, oh, nice job, if really they're missing a lot of information. Yeah? So when I come through, I can see on this drop down the names of everybody who submitted a rubric form. And that's part of what I'm looking at to give you guys these points. And I also see the comments of everybody, that everybody's comments were made here. I believe if you are paying attention and someone leaves you a comment, I believe you can also comment back, which they probably won't see because they probably won't be checking back in. But if you wanted to respond, like let's say someone made you a comment and you wanted to say like, oh, that's a good note for myself, I'm definitely going to add in blah, blah, blah. You can comment there and I'll see it if that makes a difference, or you can just take their advice and be fine. But does that help to clarify a little bit of how the peer review assignment works?
Yeah.
Yes, Patrick, I see you. Yeah, okay. It might look slightly different. That's one of the things I can't show from my view. Yeah? Okay. Well, we're well over here, so I want to let you guys go. Unless you have, although I'm here if you need me. Yeah, yeah. Okay. Thank you. I'll be here if you have questions. If you want to ask me for feedback about your choices for what you're going to write about, feel free to drop me a message, and I'm happy to make time next week.
Ruby. Sounds good.
Okay. So next week we just have your midterm peer review assignment feedback and taking the midterm, so we don't have our discussion day a week from today. Yeah, so I'm gonna delete that Zoom if I haven't done it already. Cool. So I will see you in 2 weeks unless you need me before then. Thank you guys.
Okay.
It's a pleasure chatting with you.
Bye-bye.